It's Friday, swinging open the gateway to your weekend, and we're going to fill your head with a whole bunch of thoughts. Get ready. On today's show, were the 1980s the greatest decade ever to grow up in? Debatable. AMI communications specialist Greg David joins us to talk about a TikTok trend that caused him to get a little nostalgic about his formative years. Oh my. I wonder if Greg will cry. Somebody, get him a hanky.
This is Kelly and Company.
Thanks for being with us. We're going to squeeze a lot into the next 28 minutes. Appreciate you being with us. Remember, Parasport Nation comes up following our program on AMI Audio and, of course, available to you on YouTube and as a podcast just like our show. Brock Richardson joining me today, and he's getting ready. This is a busy time, folks. I mean, the Sportsman has March Madness and baseball kicking off next week. Ooh, speaking of handing out hankies, Brock, you must be really in heaven.
Yes, this is one of my two favorite times of the year. This time of year and the October time when lots of sports are going on all at the same time. So
me too.
Love it, love it, love it.
And you're
Which one
kind
do you
of
prefer if either?
Well, March Madness is a lot of fun. Or are you talking seasons? Seasons, I think.
Seasons. Yeah.
Oh boy, I think March. I really get a kick out of this, but again, it's so hard to tell. And again, it all depends who's in the World Series. I mean, usually I'll still pay attention, watch, but I'm starting to get excited for basketball. It's, exhibition games are happening. The hockey puck crowd, they're all excited too because that all starts up. So I think for actual watching and getting excited for something, it's March. Spring training games, March Madness, and of course, for those whose teams get knocked out early, March Sadness, of course. Email us, ladies and gentlemen, kellyco@ami.ca, and call us at 1-866-509-4545. Always love to hear from you, ladies and gentlemen, especially discussing what we talk about on the show, and maybe we can even use your voice on the program. While some countries are cutting back on inclusive initiatives, Canada's doubling down with an $8.2 million investment in the National Access Arts Centre, Canada's largest and oldest disability arts organization out there. This year, they're celebrating not just their 50th anniversary, but also the announcement of a groundbreaking arts hub in Calgary. Brock and I spoke with NAC President and CEO Jun-Suk Ryu about why this investment isn't just about inclusion, it's about Canada's cultural identity. Jun-Suk, you said before that artists with disabilities represent the best of what the arts can be, and even described them as cultural ambassadors for Canada. Can you tell us what you mean by this?
I've been doing this work for a while, and when I think about artists with disabilities and the 350 Canadian artists that we're supporting at the National Access Arts Centre, they are absolutely probably the best that the arts represent. This kind of unfettered creativity that our artists demonstrate, unhindered by anything. They're not even letting their disability get in the way. And that in and of itself, I think, represents a layer of creativity that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And when we think about Canadian content, Canadian culture, and you guys are doing this all the time with the great work you're doing at AMI, but a lot of it is being influenced by our neighbors to the south, and given everything that's happening between our two countries, I think it's really important to kind of think about what sets us apart. What can we celebrate and highlight in a way that really demonstrates the best of Canadian values? And those values include that of inclusivity, diversity, and for me, the thing that really sets us apart, and we've already been able to demonstrate that over the past number of years with our international work, is to highlight and showcase the creative talents of artists and content creators with developmental and or physical disabilities, because they're able to showcase that layer of creativity that we haven't seen before, and at the same time they're able to demonstrate those Canadian values.
Tell us about your vision for the new campus and what this means for Canadian artists with disabilities.
The vision for the new campus really is around the following hypothesis, right? Can we create world-class infrastructure, state-of-the-art infrastructure to support the disability community in Canada. And when was the last time we actually talked about that in all seriousness? I mean, we're looking at buildings that house CNIB or other, disability serving organizations. And for me, sorry to those organizations, I don't think they're demonstrating the very best in architecture and design that invites the outside community in. With our $20 million campus development, we are actually building two side-by-side facilities, one housing the Visual Arts Center, another one a multidisciplinary performing arts learning venue. Both facilities marking the largest single capital investment to advance the disability arts on this side of the entire planet. And when completed, we're talking about a learning venue, a community venue, an arts and creativity hub whose priority is to be able to support the learning and artistic journey of Canadians living with disabilities.
A lot of time, places are single use at a time. This sounds like it's going to be that place where 2 or 3 things could be going on at the same time, and people aren't having to line up to schedule. Am I correct?
And Kelly, I think that's really important to highlight. When was the last time we thought about spaces where the disability community could invite others in? It's always been the other way around, especially in the arts. When we're talking about supporting arts groups that work with artists with disabilities, we're the ones having to ask others for permission to enter, permission to use, questions asked about whether they are truly accessible, trying to work around the barriers that are being posed by those facilities. Now we're completely flipping that on its head, creating an environment where the disability community is actually inviting the outside community in, where I think when completed, these facilities will actually prompt folks of all stripes to drive by, walk by, and go, hey, I'm wondering what's taking place inside that beautiful building. I'd like to actually come by for a visit, have a cup of coffee, go for a date, host a little event here, right? See a pop-up show. And to your point, absolutely, it's not just a place where incredible training and artistic creation happens, but it will also be a community-facing public venue that I hope will be celebrated by all Canadians. At some point in our life, all of us will experience a disability at one point or another before we die. Disability is not a marginalized issue. It is front and center. And to be able to create an environment, in our case at the National Access Arts Center, to be able to create an environment that highlights that perspective, that allows is perhaps a strong word, but has a platform for Canadians with disabilities to use the arts to share those perspectives and to be true communicators of their lived experience. Again, I think that's going to set us apart. It's going to create a level of content, creative content that is unparalleled by any other organization, any other arts organization in Canada for sure, but it's really going to set our country apart for being able to highlight what is really a community that should never be marginalized because of the sheer numbers that we have, but also because of the incredible talent that our community shares.
I also look at the arts community for people with disabilities as even more important, simply because you often hear, the arts gives people a voice and it gives them the expression to be able to express themselves. Well, there are some people in the world who are nonverbal. And so for them, in this case, to be able to express in the form of art is just brilliant. And it's brilliant in the sense of, hey, these people can express themselves just like everybody else. So I personally love this initiative as well. And I think you're doing wonderful things. With that said, though, you still consider Canada can be a bolder in still with similar arts organizations and their investments. But for those people who aren't, what's at stake for the organizations who aren't putting in the same level of investments?
I think you hit it on the head, right? If we are to acknowledge that the arts can be such a powerful platform to share ideas, share those stories, share those unheard perspectives, why aren't we seeing more? Why in Canada are we seeing one organization being way at the forefront of trying to shake that up? In our case, we're even taking that to a whole different level where we're connecting our artists' works to the mainstream, right? Oftentimes, and I think for decades now, the phrase quote unquote disability arts often sort of talks about a community that that absolutely it needs to be there, but it's often celebrated within its own little echo chamber. In our case, we're really trying to blow that up and ask the mainstream arts world, why aren't you doing more? How can we work and how can we collaborate with one another? And I think Canada has a long ways to go before we see that kind of true partnership happen. I've often shared, and this may be a Canadian thing overall. I mean, our successes have been far outpaced on the international stage than locally, right? When we think about what's happening in the United Arab Emirates, in various places in Europe, in various places in Asia, they are absolutely biting at the bit to, to partner with us, to work with our artists, because they're in their local sort of arts and culture ecosystems. They have a layer of mainstream collaboration and partnership that we have not yet seen in Canada. And so it gives us a lot of food for thought to think about what more can our arts and culture space do in Canada to be more genuine in collaborating with and showcasing artists with disabilities.
I think you guys having that piece in the conversation, Brock, pertaining that resource for those to be able to speak out, especially people nonverbal. It's a freedom that people as artists really want to have. Everyone does different types of artists. What a venue to showcase it and to be able to say, we're doing this here. You can come here and do this. And I know that artists have to go. We always hear, hey, I'm going to go to the big city where I can get on stage, or I'm going to do this where my art will get sold, the work I do, and that kind of thing. And there's always those venues where artists gather, work together, consult with each other. And I think that is so important to have. And here we have this location in Calgary that is going to scream so much, come here, do your art here. And we can always say, well, that should be something we as a disabled person should have access to, whether you're in London, Kitchener, wherever it might be, like we are. I love it because I know it's the same with others, but with us in the disability community, Brock, even more so, because there's so little of this. And one screaming out about this, talking about this, so many of us are listening saying, one place in Canada.
Yeah, and there could always be more. While funding is for a new space is a big win, John Suck has his sights set on even bigger and higher. He spoke to us about the bigger picture for the arts in Canada and who he's looking towards for inspiration on the world stage.
If we're going to look around, Korea's arts work in arts and culture, especially in support for disability representation, has been a big influence for you. Tell us what makes it stand out on the world stage for us to follow and let them lead by example.
It's so fascinating to look at a country like Korea and what they've done on the inclusive arts sort of agenda. One of the main reasons why we're building our two buildings in Calgary is a result of what I saw in Korea. Back in 2017, I visited a center. It's called the Disability Art and Culture Center of Korea. And it is a dedicated learning space, a dedicated presentation space, and they just opened an additional theater space as well, whose sole priority is to support, advance the training and creation ambitions of artists with developmental and/or physical disabilities. That was the very first time. I mean, I've worked in the disability space for a while now, even before joining the National Access Arts Center, and the first time that I had seen dedicated infrastructure being built to supporting the disability community in the art space. And so that therein lies its own sort of inspiration for the work that we've done in building our own space. With this impending or ongoing trade war with the States, I think we're beginning to slowly ask the question, where is our talent coming from, and how do we create an ecosystem here in Canada that is sustainable and that has the potential to have a global impact and an economic impact as well. And often people say, well, Canada is a small country and therefore it can't outshine the creative outputs of the States. And going back to Korea a bit, Korea is a country that's not that much larger population-wise than Canada, and it has a geographic size of half of Vancouver Island. It's a very tiny country, and I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners have seen Squid Game. time. They're listening to BTS and K-pop. I can't seem to, turn it off. I mean, it kind of drives me up the wall, but it's everywhere. We here in Canada have that potential to do the same, but it begins by moving away from the complete obsession with the output product, right? There's process behind it. How do we create that ecosystem where people can begin to explore the arts, begin to be trained in the arts, but not just what's seen at the end as a final product, but how do we create an ecosystem that celebrates that process? And that's what sets the NAC apart, right? We actually don't do that many shows, and oftentimes we have supporters and sponsors and donors going, oh well, why can't we go see more of your artists' works at galleries locally? And I go, well, we don't emphasize that. We emphasize the opportunity to create. And that's, when you actually look at the career of an artist, the output products that actually get celebrated for that artist probably is about 1 in 1,000, right? They've made that attempt 1,000 times, and then they have that one final product that actually, creates a name for themselves, whether that's in visual arts or in performing arts. It's the very same experiment that we want to create, that open lab environment at the NAC, where an artist with disabilities might take longer. It might require a few more adaptable sort of technology to be able to make it happen. But you know what? We're going to create that environment for that process to happen, because we know when we give them enough time, they will be able to produce some of the most extraordinary works, that 1 in 1,000 that can have a global impact. And I tell people to aim high. That's sort of our mantra at the NAC is, aim high, because we're gonna, we might not get there, but we'll still jump as much as we can to try and make as much progress. And I feel like we have this weird, and this is a Canadian thing, I'm sure, this weird kind of going, this is okay. I'm okay with what we're doing right now. This is good enough. It's just let's just be middle of the road. And it's even much more pervasive in the disability sector. This is okay, and it should be the most innovative. It should be the most risk-taking. It has hundreds of millions of dollars at its disposal to actually push the bar and reach higher. We're a rinky-dink, $2 million a year in revenues, little small enterprise, and we're doing it. Why can't all of our other organizations do the same? Aim high.
For me, it's all about the willpower behind when you do something like this. When you take a look at Korea and all the things that they're doing around disability, I think that shows to you can do it if you have the willpower behind, and it can be a small organization. And I totally agree with John Suck when he says we settle here in Canada and we're just status quo, and I think we need to reach beyond that, Kelly.
I always find it interesting when we think about comedy. A lot of the sitcoms used to be written, I'm teeing us up for the next segment, I must admit, when I say in the 80s, most of the comics came, they said, from Canada, the writers for them, at least, that were adding to the sitcoms. There was so much comedy coming out of Canada. And you get those pockets of the world where certain things are done, like what he was saying about Korea is just amazing when you think about it. And I love the idea that you're going to probably have this pocket where all these artists will have worked in Calgary, come out of there in the future. So many of us will be saying, hey, I'm an artist, I'm going to go to Calgary because this friendly, warm venue. And yeah, it should be everywhere. We don't want things to fall into that, but really wonderful. Well, that was just a bit of the conversation we had with John Suck Ryu, President and CEO of the National Access Arts Center. He spoke with us about the $8.2 million investment from the federal government in support of their new hub in Calgary. There's much more. Check us out on YouTube from our YouTube page to hear more of JS's vision for disability arts in Calgary and, of course, across Canada. Remember to check out our podcast from your podcast platform of choice. Subscribe, if you would, to our YouTube page, too, while you're out there messing around and wanting to enjoy the content so much in both places. When you subscribe to the podcast and enjoy the show there, please give us a rating and review.
Our TV guy, Greg David, saw something on TikTok recently that had a profound effect and caused him to look back on the 1980s when he was just a teenager. Greg, welcome back to the program. And it begs the question, what did you find that had such an effect on you?
Oh, thanks for having me on today. Yeah, it was this TikTok trend, I was scrolling through, I guess it was last weekend, and there were more and more posts in my feed that were showing Gen Xers looking off into the distance while the first several bars of the music to Madonna's 1986 single "Live to Tell" played. And the words on the screens talked about growing up in the 1980s and how they wish that they could go back to that decade and never leave. Obviously, if you grew up in the 80s, you're probably in your early to mid 50s by this point, maybe a little bit older and maybe a little bit younger. But it just, since March 10th, when this post went up, there have been 5.3 million Live to Tell posts on TikTok. And so it got me, Kelly teased off the top about me crying. I didn't get emotional, but I definitely got nostalgic, and it made me feel like, there was a part of me that said, yeah, I didn't realize how good I had it in the 80s when I was going to high school and listening to hair metal and worrying about what back patch I was going to put on the back of my denim vest. Spoiler alert, it was Venom. But I just thought, people talk about simpler times and not locking their doors. And I thought, well, were the 1980s the best decade to grow up in? And some of the most successful TV shows on the air and even streaming now today reflect on the 1980s. You had reboots of Magnum PI and MacGyver that were both on traditional network television, but you also have Stranger Things, which has another season, the final season coming up, that's set in the 1980s and has a lot of that music ingrained in it. It was also the 80s, the decade that brought us E.T., the extraterrestrial, the Indiana Jones franchise, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, the best movie in the Star Wars canon, Ghostbusters, Terminator, Back to the Future, and Rambo. So it just kind of was like, yeah. It was also when I first started to read Stephen King and reading books like Cujo and Night Shift and The Stand and things like that. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Kelly, you and I are kind of around the same age. So how about the 80s for you? What do you think? Best decade ever?
I think it's the most memorable for me, but impact and things that I liked. I love the 70s, so lack of complication, but I'm more of a music fan out of the 70s. As we got to the late, I think I tend to let the 80s blend, but definitely familiarity with the 80s for sure. But it's interesting because in the 80s, I was a child of the late 1950s, 60s music because of the influence of Happy Days. The Wonder Years came on, the original Wonder Years. So you looked a lot at the 60s. 70s were almost blanked out. It was really interesting because as a person who loved broadcasting in the 80s when I first got my love of it and loved music, I couldn't find as much 70s music because everybody was sick of the 70s music. In the 80s, because we played it to death over and over and over, there's only so much Crystal Gale and company you could take. And then you kind of lost it, but they still were looking at the 60s for people who were in their late 30s, 40s going, oh man, what a great time. We did this, we did that. Vietnam came along, so that influence was there, following Korea. So I always found it really interesting because even as you mentioned, Back to the Future, Back to the 50s. So it was very interesting how our fascination in the 80s was the same as we're talking now, looking back too. But there's no question that growing up, even as we got into the late 90s, 80s music was the thing. Themed parties and stuff like that. Everybody wanted to do the 80s stuff. I think the most of the 70s was laughing about the disco and platform shoes, Brock.
Yeah, I mean, as you guys were talking, for me, I looked at it and say, well, growing up, all I knew was 80s music, and I was young and I was growing up, but that's the generation my parents had. And so for me now, what's troubling is when you see how many of these 80s songs on TikTok do you know, and I sit there and I go, I got 9 out of 10, and that's a problem for me. And that's the moment when I realize, oh boy, even though I'm in the 90s and 91, it's like, yeah, but I kind of fall into that category still because of when I grew up and the 90s music hadn't quite kicked in yet compared to the 80s when I was really young.
And the influence of your parents, right? Greg, how about you? Were your parents, like my mom, my dad was a little more, he liked all kind of music. He liked to dance, but he could listen to his big bands of the 40s and he could listen to jazz of the 70s and be up there dancing with all the top hits of the 80s. But my mom was very much Pointer Sisters and Tina Turner and everything. But she was a huge movie fan of that time too, Mad Max and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in 71, so growing up and being a little kid, I heard the music that my parents listened to. So Supertramp, ABBA, Nana Muscuri, Roger Whittaker, Peter, Paul and Mary, Simon and Garfunkel. So yeah, The Who. Yeah, my dad has really eclectic taste and would really listen to anything. He was a member of a church, is a member of a church choir. So I had a lot of that kind of impacted on me. But it's interesting, Kelly, you mentioned about the different decades, and somebody on Reddit posted that what was different about the 80s was that politics wasn't part of the mainstream pop culture.
Yep.
The 60s had the civil rights movement and the anti-war culture, which you said. The 70s had Watergate and drugs. So by the 80s, pop culture was burned out on politics, and they wanted to escape. So yes, there was political turmoil in the 80s, but the youth culture tended to ignore it. And I also, digging a little bit deeper into this because I was kind of fascinated about it, is that there was a Silver magazine article that revealed the following: that nostalgia is a longing or yearning for something that has happened in our past. This was said by psychotherapist Karen Hartley. The feeling of nostalgia is real, and it's triggered by something that reminds you of previous times, and it also becomes most prominent in hard or uncertain times. And we're definitely in those uncertain times right now, right? Research has found that memory tends to accentuate the positive and dismiss the negative. So we forget the casual racism, sexism, and homophobia and unemployment of the 70s and 80s in favor of recalling fewer cars on the streets and fun times at the roller disco. So really, really interesting when you talk about that turmoil that's going on in your life right now that causes you to think back to those quote unquote simpler times. So I think that's a big reason why this TikTok trend took off so much in the last couple of weeks.
I know some will say food is what they remember. Me, it was music. I associate music with being at wrestling tournaments, hanging out, laughing. I'm not a big knower of the words of songs and things like that. It's just the feel. 70s made me feel carefree. I liked all that funk and that kind of thing from then. And my sister pulling me off the couch and teaching me how to dance and stuff like that when I was in the 70s. But 80s, it's more I reflect the music.
Always appreciate your time, Greg, and it's funny that we talk about this idea of what's old is new again, because I think we're getting back into the political sphere of things with music and TikTok and social media. Greg, always appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That was Greg David talking to us about the 1980s.
I really love kind of our reflection like that because it does make you think. And I don't know what my favorite food was other than pizza, Brock. Buddy, thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Let's see what you want to talk about at Kelly & Co. AMI on Instagram and Twitter. On our next program, in modern cities, can you make sense of the street corners as a blind and low vision person by simply just listening? Or are GPS and other mapping tools absolutely necessary now for accessible travel? We talk out the safety of it all with orientation and mobility specialist Mark Rankin on Monday's show. So you have a great weekend and get out of here, will ya?
Thanks for tuning in to Kelly & Company. Follow us on all social media and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more.